Good afternoon. Welcome to EduSet Network. Friend, as you know, we have organized 2 lectures on sociological thought, particularly dominant paradigm. So there are 2 lectures. One is the one on dominant paradigm in classical sociological thought, and the other is dominant paradigm in modern sociological thought. Today we are going to discuss dominant paradigm in classical sociological thought, and for discussion on this very topic, we have in studio eminent social science thinker, Professor Anand Kumar. He is senior professor, academician, thinker, noted scholar, and you all are known to him. So I think we should not waste our time to introduce him. He has got a number of awards, and he is a professor of sociology in Jawaharlal Nehru University. So this is the ways to which I can describe him, because you know him. So with this word, I request him to start the lecture. Welcome, sir.
Friends, today we are going to engage ourselves in understanding the emergence and spread of classical sociological thoughts in the world in the last 2 centuries. I will try to present the interesting story of emergence of this new way of understanding social realities by first giving you the context of the emergence of sociological theories and thinkers. Then we look at 2 major schools or trends, or as you can say, paradigms of sociological theories and thought in classical sociology. While introducing the emergence, we have to remember that sociology was born out of a situation of intellectual vacuum and directionlessness caused by great transition in human civilization with the rise of forces which created 3 very important novelties. First, Industrial Revolution, which had origins in England, created a great process of social transformation with multidimensional implications for economy, society, culture, and polity, called industrialization. The second was the rise of a worldview, a comprehensive system of interrelation between people and economy, between people, and between various parts of the society as well as the modern world system. It was identified as capitalism. And the third was rise of nation states as the essential political organization for putting together groups of people of diverse interest, identities, regions, and religions. So industrialization followed and coupled with capitalism and nation state provided a new context to make sense of various changes and resultant institutions, processes, and ideas to organize human societies. In this context, we remember a few founding thinkers from France, England, Germany, Italy, and some other parts of modern Europe. In the French context, we had three very eminent thinkers who wanted to make sense of realities beyond philosophy and theology-based concepts, categories, and understanding. They were Saint-Simon, Saint-Simon, Auguste Comte, and Emile Durkheim. They all had a challenge to interpret the trends which were on the horizon beyond the structures of village communities, kingdoms, and churches. This was complemented by works of people in neighboring Germany, where Hegel, Karl Marx, followed by Max Weber, and Georg Simmel tried to understand the laws of motion of mind, capital, societies, and communities. There was also some contribution coming from English intellectual world, particularly Herbert Spencer, who tried to suggest that societies are evolving, growing, stabilizing, and then sometimes decaying like any other organism in the natural world. We also had some contributions from Italians like Wilfred Pareto and Mosca, who gave us an understanding of various categories of people, their attributes, and their circulation and change of places to make a better picture of new categories, new trends, and new orientations among individuals and groups of people in these three very turbulent centuries in Europe. Out of all this, we have some benchmark events which have affected the making of sociology and classical sociological theories. These are 1760, there was the beginning of Industrial Revolution in England, which changed the mode of production, which created migration from villages to cities, which were new centers of economy for large-scale production through new technology and new social organizations beyond the guilds of artisans and home-based production units. Then there was political revolution of France towards the later part of 18th century, 1789 to be precise, where the idea of divine theory of authority and power and society was challenged by social contract theory, and that created a new basis of relating with each other, moving from status to contract, moving from religion-controlled social systems to market-oriented and politically reorganized schemes of relations, conflicts, cooperation, and competition. And then this all culminated in that famous early 20th century revolution in Russia between 1905 and 1917, where the idea of society was subjected to great political transformations on the basis of principles of equality, fraternity, and solidarity beyond capitalism. So you see the rise of sociology and sociological theories with this huge transformational backdrop. And therefore, sociologists got divided between two categories of theorists, one who was looking for order and continuity, and the other who was looking for change and progress. The first group of sociologists were not indifferent to the processes of change and progress, but for them, change and progress was subordinated by the imperatives of order and function. This group is associated with a dominant sociological school and its paradigm, which is generally identified as structural functionalism, which begins with some of the anthropologists like Malinowski and Redfield Brown, and goes up to Talcott Parsons and Robert Merton. Malinowski and Redfield Brown created an understanding of human societies by looking at some of the most primitive communities in their elementary form of existence, untouched by processes like migration, technological changes, political turbulence, and social revolutions. It was suggested by these social anthropologists that societies are created by a system of interdependence where institutions are the way to meet basic needs, and these institutions are frameworks for key processes which are necessary for human survival, not only as biological beings, but also as social beings. These ideas led to the belief that just like nature, there are certain elements, certain structures which create certain framework, and therefore society has to be understood as a social system with subsystems, and these social system and subsystems create the framework for people to engage in social action. Every social action creates a component for social order, and order is a basic requirement for human societies. The ideas of all the structural, functional, approach related theorists have been finally put together in a paradigm by great American sociologist Talcott Parsons. Talcott Parsons' work on the idea of social action as the essential principle for theorizing about society is organically related with the contribution of Emile Durkheim, who suggested that just like natural facts, we also live around social facts, which are sui generis. They are independent of individuals. Individuals are born and they die, they come and they go, but social facts are independent of individual choices. And they are social in the sense that they are created by interaction among people, which is the basis for society. He also argued that we are seeing a transformation in modern times because of these revolutions, industrial revolution, political revolution, social revolution, but it is not creating a disorder, it is not creating a chaos, it is not creating an anarchy, it is only creating a change in the quality of social systems. Prior to the revolutions, societies were organized around the principle of mechanical solidarity. After the revolution, now the societies are transforming and are emerging around the reality of organic solidarity. So, instead of thinking that we are moving from order to chaos, these structural functionalist sociologists suggested that there is qualitative improvement in the nature of our societies because of these transformations. Earlier we were interdependent in a mechanical sense. Now we are becoming interrelated and interdependent in an organic sense. And organic solidarity is a much higher basis of togetherness than mechanical solidarity. Now let's look at the essential ideas of structural functionalism, which are based upon the assumption that societies are constituted by the essential function of social action. Social action is the basic brick, essential element of any social system. Social action is related with social function. Social functions are basically of two kinds, latent and manifest. At the same time, there is also need to recognize that social functions are also creating two consequences. One is positive function and the other is negative function, which is also called dysfunction. So social action, social function, these are two interconnected realities which bind all of us as human beings. How do they do it? They do it because of four very important components in our social life. First and foremost is the reality of social needs. We all as human beings become members of society to fulfill our basic needs. These needs require social action. So all of us are there in society as social actors who have certain roles, and they get certain rewards out of those social roles. These social actors are engaged with each other in purposive action in a particular context. The context could be family, marriage, religion, state, nation state, crowd, university, street, market, but no one is engaged in social action as a social actor without a context. And finally, there is an environment for social actor, social action, social needs, social context, and that is the social setting. If you look at all these, then you have to realize that we all become social beings from biological beings with the help of certain critical processes and certain critical mechanisms. The most important process, according to structural functional approach, is the process of socialization, which begins with the very birth of all of us as human beings. We become subjected to socialization by our parents, peer group, school, state, media, neighborhood, religion, and this process of socialization continues for a very long time, probably till we are no more. This process of socialization is complemented by institutions of control and order. Social control is a very important requirement for any society. And this control is there in the form of authority and authority-related institutions. There is also a very important reality called institutional framework. These institutional frameworks are provided by society through a kind of legitimacy and sanction and reproduction, where process of socialization plays a very important role. The structural functional approach has been the dominant approach in much of modern sociology of Europe and America till the 1960s. It explained making of modern Europe and America. It interpreted the rise and fall of institutions of religion, economy, polity, and culture. It also explained the continuity and expansion of European civilization despite going through a few major revolutions in the 18th and 19th century. But then there are criticisms also. What are the major criticisms of structural functional paradigm, which created and necessitated rise and spread of other paradigms, particularly the paradigm which is associated with theories of conflict and progress around the ideas of Hegel and Karl Marx, much more with Marx and post-Karl Marx, or you can say neo-Marxist, new left social theories. The first major objection about structural functional paradigm is its bias about equilibrium. The structural functional approach suggests that society is inherently oriented towards creating an equilibrium between various competing interests, social actors, their communities, and their institutions. This equilibrium is the basis for social order. And if there are certain changes, those changes are part of the evolution as it is there in any organism. But if there is a disorder, a decay, a disequilibrium, it is not very desirable state of affairs, because it is against the requirements of society as a functional system of interrelated social actors who are all engaged together around a common framework of values, institutions, and processes to fulfill their essential needs. So, structural functional approach becomes diffident, deficient, and insufficient in explaining social conflict, social chaos, social revolutions. This reality became much more obvious when the sociologists of Europe failed to make sense of the movements of national liberation in the colonies of Britain and France in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. They became much more incapable to attract and engage younger minds when there was no sincere and serious, convincing interpretation of the problem of racism in America, the problem of war and related protest in the NATO countries, and the problem of women protest and rise of movements for peace, civil rights, and gender justice. This was the time of getting back to the conflict theories and rediscovery of the conflict approach, because conflict became the dominant feature of most of the Euro-American social formations. It was ultimately inviting because there was a revolution kind of orientation and situation around 1968, symbolized by the barricading of various national capitals by alliances of students and workers, men and women, black and white, young and old. Now let us look at the making of the other major approach, which is related with process of dialectics and centrality of conflict and progress. They are called conflict approach theories or conflict paradigm. They are essentially associated with two great German thinkers, Hegel and Karl Marx. They have been complemented by the post-Marxist sociologists like Levi-Strauss, Ralph Dahrendorf, and a whole generation of post-Koser, Dahrendorf sociologists led by Andre Gunnar Frank, Samir Amin, Emanuel Wallerstein, and many others, generally called the neo-Marxist or new left social theorists and thinkers. The idea of conflict is associated with Hegelian proposition that societies move around a dialectical process where societies are confronted with a particular thesis which generates space and reason and situation for antithesis. The conflict between proponents of thesis and antithesis then move on with the social imperatives to create a synthesis. This three-stage process of change is an inherent process which affects our ideas, our values, our institutions, and of course our processes. But the idea of Hegel around centrality of values and ideas in the making of societies was challenged and critiqued constructively by his follower in a limited sense and his critique in another sense, Karl Marx. Karl Marx, born in Germany and passed away in 1883, so he was witness to a large period of social change, and this period was a period of great transformations, failed revolutions, and this failed revolution created the need to inquire into the laws of motion of capital, which then became the basis for a historical theoretical contribution by Karl Marx in 3 volumes of Capital, which was originally written in German and was called Das Kapital. Karl Marx was a great synthesizer of ideas, and in his ideas there were 3 strands, 3 streams of intellectual heritage. One was the tradition of German philosophy, German idealism, mostly associated with writings of Hegel. Then was British political economy, where writings of Adam Smith and many other classical economists were used by Marx in a very creative manner to make sense of rise and expansion of capitalism in between 17th and 19th century. And then was the third tradition of French socialism, related with writings of Saint-Simon and many other contemporaries who were looking at society as a system of interdependent relations which has moved progressively through the ages and is bound to move and settle down with a system of egalitarian values, institutions, and processes. Karl Marx suggested that instead of looking at social actors, social action, and social institutions in an unrelated manner, we must recognize the hierarchy of significance of economic, political, social, and cultural, where economy is the basis of rest of our social realities. He gave the ideas of substructure and superstructure. Substructure is created by togetherness of relations of production and forces of production. Relations of production and forces of production create a group of people who are interrelated but with opposite interests. It is a situation of unity of opposites. And they create basic classes whose cooperation and conflict becomes the dynamo, the engine for social change and social progress. When social relations of production become barrier for the forces of production, those relations of productions are destroyed by a new set of social relations of production. Social forces of production have been evolving and changing over a very large period of human history. This has created a progressive change which has gone through 4 stages so far, according to Karl Marx. We began with a stage of primitive communism, which was dominated by forces of nature. Then we moved from primitive communism to the age of slavery, when a group of forced laborers, a group of people commanded by a handful of others who were physically more forceful, more strong, dominating, were the prime movers. Age of slavery was followed by age of feudalism, with agriculture and land as the basic foundations of social formation. Feudalism created contradictions where unity of famished peasants and harassed traders created a new social alliance to inaugurate the era of capitalism, where certain technological changes, certain economic changes, and certain social changes promoted what we see as modern societies, with industrialization, capitalism, and nation states as the organizing forces of contemporary times. But Karl Marx argued that capitalism has many contradictions. So the thesis of capitalism will be challenged by antithesis of socialism, because there will be a tendency of increasing socialization of production process, which will not be sustainable by the system of privatization of means of ownership of means of production and profit of the economic processes. It will create general pauperization and selective bourgeoification. Karl Marx suggested that the contradiction of socialism will give more and more power to the industrial workers, who are the primary producing forces, against the united force of capitalists and land-owning classes. And gradually, with the change of consciousness, the class of industrial proletariats will change from class in itself with class for itself. They'll become socially conscious of their common interest and common challenges, and that will promote an era of radical conflicts, which will ultimately move from class conflict to class struggle. In the conflict theory and historical materialist paradigm of Karl Marx, classes are recognized as the prime movers of social history, and class conflict and class struggle as the basic engine of social progress. Theory of classes and class struggles was visited by later day sociologists and social thinkers who suggested that both structural functional paradigm and historical materialist paradigm are having their own value for understanding various stages, phases, and facets of social reality. There is need to have a critical understanding of both the paradigms, but just like structural functional approach, historical materialist approach had its own critiques. One of the major criticisms of Marxist paradigm was related with its limited geographical focus, where the idea of class and class conflict and progress was confined to the events and realities of European continent. It was charged with Eurocentrism. It had no satisfactory explanation of the relationship between the progress of European nation states, who had emerged as new empires like Britain and France, and the underdevelopment of their colonies like India and Algeria. The denial of realities of pauperization in the colonies within the Marxist understanding has been one big criticism of classical Marxist paradigm, which has been then accommodated by contributions of a good number of Marxist social thinkers, ranging from Rosa Luxemburg and Leon Trotsky and Vladimir Ivanovich Lenin to Andre Gunnar Frank and Immanuel Wallerstein and Samir Amin. The second problem with Marxist approach has been its focus on linear progress of human societies. It fails to accommodate the historical evidences of rise and fall and then rise of civilizations and societies. It has argued that all societies will go through 4 stages of progress since primitive communist era. But then this scheme of Marxist evolutionary social theory has been underlined with certain deficits, as it fails to explain the Asian realities of China, India, Egypt, and many other social formations. This has been then corrected by Indian, Chinese, Egyptian Marxists, but then obviously it has been found that Eurocentricity is a major weakness of Marxist paradigm, in spite of its great power and capacity to explain the relevance of conflict, necessity of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis approach around dialectical imagination, and its emphasis upon the value of conflicts and revolutions. So now we have 2 major paradigms to interpret any social reality, with all of us using them in selective and eclectic manner, apart from those who are following the classical frameworks provided by structural functional and historical materialist theories. The writings of Talcott Parsons have been the basis of the paradigm of structural functionalism, and its critique, as the writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels have been used to present historical materialist or conflict paradigm with certain modifications by later day social scientists. Now, we can think of certain questions and explanations as per your ideas and your understanding of these two classical approaches which have helped modern minds to understand society, social order, social change, and social progress in the last 100 years or so. So I welcome your questions, and I hope that question answer session will give you some more clarity and some more understanding of the classical sociological approaches which are the basis of modern sociology.
So as you said that in Marxist approach there are linear way of thinking. So when we look at this theory in the context of India, so this theory failed to explain the contradiction or the strength or the weaknesses of Indian society. Yeah, we need a different way of looking the Marxian theory to explain the India.
It's not only India, but even in case of Europe, Marxist theory failed to explain absence of revolution in mature capitalist countries and rise of fascism and Nazism in places like Germany and Italy. And therefore, a great critique by a genuine communist Marxist came from Italy. Antonio Gramsci argued that in Marxist scheme of things, there was very insufficient attention to the role and power of culture. Similarly, in case of India, Marx failed to understand the interdependent relationship between villages and towns, Indian economy and society and culture with the rest of the world. He thought that this is a changeless social order where the idea of religion and caste had been dominating, and they were very different people who had only otherworldly approach, and they needed shaking up. And he thought that British Empire, though very brutal and cruel, was playing a progressive role in India.
Yep.
And therefore, Marxist understanding of Indian society and culture needed very many corrections, which caused very limited role of Marxist sociology in interpreting Indian social realities.
Okay, when we look at the Marxian perspective, the foundation of what we saw, that is totally based on the European experience. So that foundation need to be also widened to understand the theory or to make the relevant of the Marxian theory of explaining the contemporary
Very
society.
true. What has happened in the last 50 years, since 1960s, because of the crisis of Western sociology, there was a group of neo-Marxist social scientists who looked at the literature and figures of Latin America, Asia and Africa. And this group has been identified as the school of development of underdevelopment or dependencia theory, which emerged out of the realities of Latin America,
right,
where the Marxist understanding of imperialism as a progressive force for the colonies was found to be baseless. And they suggested that basic idea of class and class conflict is okay, but its sociological interpretation requires an integrated view, which then later on was established by Immanuel Wallerstein around what he called world system approach. That social change with the Marxist model cannot be interpreted within any nation state, because economically the world is interrelated and interdependent. In case of Russian Revolution, Stalin and some others used Marxist model to explain revolution in Russia, and that was the dominant way, but now it is called orthodox Marxist model.
Okay. So generally when we try to understand the society or try to explain the society, we look at the some theory or the whatever the way suggested by the thinker, past thinker. What is the contemporary way of looking the society?
It's a very important question for all the students. There is a sociology of knowledge. Whenever you look at the theories of any important theorist or thinker, you must look at their time, their biography, and their agenda, what we call otherwise Desha, Kala, Patra, togetherness. So you have to see the time of the thinker, what was the environment, what were the institutional and historical situations. Second, what was his or her own biography? What were the foundational aspects of this person's intellectual persona? And third, what was his or her intellectual agenda? Because if you're looking for apple, you are not expected to explain how to look for mangoes. The agenda is very important because that creates the focus of any theoretical process.
Okay, so keeping this in view, can we say that the theorist should be an objective person?
This is very important caution given by a great sociologist, one of the founders of modern sociology, Max Weber. He talked about the need to have objectivity as the basis for your inquiry. If you do not maintain objectivity, then your biases, your desires, your expectations color your findings. And this makes you not a sociologist, only an ideologue or a propagandist. So ideological commitment should be as little as possible. Now there are others who say that value neutrality is not possible in absolute sense of the term. We are biased by our gender, our nationality, our religion, our age, our class, but methodology-wise, we should try to have such sophisticated methods that these biases can be controlled. So objectivity is the essential condition for any scientific exercise.
Okay. Now we have a general question from a student point of view. How do we look at the paradigm and perspective in a thought process?
Paradigm is a body of interrelated concepts and theories which has the power to explain social reality. Perspective is providing only direction, not a whole system of concepts and theories. So out of a perspective you can develop a paradigm, or out of a paradigm you can develop a perspective. Both are possible, but paradigm is the powerful process, the powerful system of ideas, concepts and theories which is used to make sense of any complex reality, whereas perspective only gives us certain concepts. It will not give us a theoretical framework.
Okay, so when we say classical sociological thought and modern classical thought, so what is the major changes in the paradigm?
I think the classical sociological thought, as we discussed about Marx, was mostly Eurocentric. Most of the theories grew out of the experiences and facts of France, England, Germany, Italy, and related countries. Beyond that, there was also a problem of bias of religion, race, and gender. Most of these people were men. They had very limited capacity to engage in the world of being a woman. Most of them were white and Christians and Jewish. So they had very limited understanding and capacity to look at the conceptual power of other cultural traditions of inquiry and knowledge. So this was classical sociology. Now, classical sociology was applied beyond and within Europe and was found to be insufficient. And that created problem of paradigmatic shift. And from modernization, we have moved to post-modernity. From gender-neutral perspective, we have now a feminist discourse. We also have now some kind of cultural relativity in making exercises about social analysis. So, classical sociology was organized around power of structural functional paradigm and partly the contribution of conflict paradigm. Post-classical sociology or modern sociology is now organized with the help of many schools of thought, which include structural functionalism, structuralism, Marxism, cultural studies, feminism. Variety of other discourses have emerged, including postmodernism and post-structuralism. So now you have multiple approaches. That is the basic difference between classical period and the contemporary period.
So, newer students, newcomer in the sociology, what they should have in the mind, what basic prerequisite you expect from them so that their foundation be strong and further ending whatever he or she does?
It's very important question. First of all, any person who wants to become a student of sociology must know the key concepts about society. Once you are clear about the key concepts, then you will be able to make sense of major theoretical traditions. And then they should go and have an understanding of evolution of sociological understanding about what is society, what is social order, what is social change, because all these questions have been visited again and again by a few generations of social scientists since the days of Saint-Simon and Auguste Comte, which means since the late 18th century. So in last 200 years, questions are remaining constant, but answers are changing. And they have to know the changing answers so that they know that the same reality has been interpreted with multiple concepts and multiple theories. This plurality will give them space to develop a better understanding of this complexity called society.
Okay. So, but as you said, these are the things need to be kept in the mind. But dynamics of society, dynamics of social order, also changing country into country, means a space, one space to a space. So, do you expect the thinkers, theorists, which the universal, you say, the world over thinker like Karl Marx, he tried to explain the society of the world, or the Hegel, whoever it is?
No, it's very difficult. When we looked at the world with focus on Europe, we all thought that this is how rest of the humanity will go. But then we realized that the European model was not applicable in Latin America, in South Asia, in China, in South Africa. So there we became aware of the limits of mythological nationalism and Eurocentric sociology.
Okay.
This has created the need to be cautious about the limits of universal theories. And a group of sociologists led by Robert Merton argued for middle range theory. Some other scholars thought of asking to have multiple theories to explain the same reality from the perspective of patriarchy, from the perspective of feminism, from the perspective of blacks, from the perspective of whites, from the perspective of America and India. So now there is need to integrate all these multiple perspectives in some kind of a creative manner. But to think that the European thinkers gave universal theories is now out of date. Okay. They tried to interpret the world, but their interpretation was very Europe specific.
So now that is not possible, and that has come to the view of students and theorists also.
That's right. Now we require two things: comparative understanding, same phenomena having different impact in different societies, different classes, different situations, number one. Number two, interdisciplinarity. Only sociology will not be sufficient, as only economics, political science, history, psychology will not be sufficient. So comparability, a comparative view, and interdisciplinarity. These are two requirements for any person to be a good sociology student.
Okay. And also say a region or a space centric.
That is comparative. That when you look at a reality, you must be aware that this is happening in Arab world, it is happening in China, it is happening in France. It may not necessarily be happening in India. There may be similar institutions, say democracy, similar technology, say computer, but they will have different implications because there is a big reality which is like a filter called culture, value system. So same food may have different priorities, non-vegetarian, vegetarian, same way of life may have different reception. Some societies value more money, other societies may like to control. They call for money and connect it with some other requirements. So you have to realize that there is this Desh, Kal, Patra triangle through which every principle has to be tested and interpreted. We cannot think of universal laws because there are certain given conditions under which these laws, these theories hold true. If those conditions are not there, then those theories become defective. And this is there for the natural phenomena also. In physics or chemistry, we say, given those conditions, only then this will operate. If the conditions change, then the process will also change.
Okay, the last question I would like to ask you, in given this situation, how classic work and the work will be defined henceforward?
Well, classical work is like the foundation of any beautiful building, but this is not the only thing. You have to see what were the limitations of the foundation process and what were the challenges and how to complement it, how to build further.
Okay. So, well friends, with these words we conclude the lecture. I thank all of you for watching the lecture, and on your behalf I thank Professor Anand Kumar for giving such an insightful lecture. Thank you very much.